what if we want to send data to a function? So, like for instance, what we've seen so far is, like, let's say that we use this POW function. We know that we send it some data, right? We know we send it 2 numbers. And so basically we can send data into a function when it's called. And so this data that we're sending to a function, first I'm going to talk about the terminology associated with this, and then we'll look at how we write our functions so that we can send data into them. So first of all, if we look at this POW function, so the variables that we send into a function are called parameters. And so a parameter is basically a variable in a function that holds the value passed. So and this will make more sense once we see how to write our functions to receive data. But a parameter is basically variables in a function that hold the values passed. And so then arguments are the actual values passed to the function. So actual values passed to functions. So if we look at this POW function, it's going to have 2 parameters that are the variables that hold the values that we're passing, and then the arguments are the actual values that we're passing. So for instance, this function call right here where we're calling the POW, A and B would be the arguments because they're the values that we're sending to the function. You'll see some different terminology used for these things, so it can be kind of confusing, but I just want to tell you the other terms that are associated with parameter and arguments, and then we're not going to worry too much about terminology. We're just going to realize what it is So parameters are also called formal parameter, whereas this argument can be called an actual parameter. And the parameters can also be called formal arguments. And the argument can be called actual argument. So in here, when I'm talking about parameters or arguments, I'm just going to use the word parameter or argument, but just so you know, if you're Googling this or looking things up, it can have these different terms associated with it. And I think this actually can be kind of confusing because the formal argument is a parameter versus like actual parameter is the argument. So just don't get too caught up in the terminology with these. So now let's look at how we would actually write our function so that we can send data into our function. So let's just continue looking at void functions. So let's say that we have a void function, and the name of the function is display value. And so what we want to do is we want to send a value to this function for it to display. And so we want to send a value to the function. So we're going to send it an integer and just call it num. So this is our function. And let's say that this function has a cout statement in it that just prints the value that was sent to the function to the screen. So the value is, and we're just going to print out the value that it received. And then let's look at how this would work. So this is our function. Let's look at how this would work with the main function. So let's say that we have our main function. So we have this void function above the main function. And let's just say that we're going to call this function and send it a value. So we can do this a few different ways. So first of all, to call a function, it's just the name of the function. So in this case, it would be display value. And we can send it a variable. So for instance, if this int x, let's say this is equal to 2 or something like that, we can put the name of the variable into the function call. Or we can send it an actual value, so we could say display value, we could send it a number, and there's no space here, like that. And then, or we can also put mathematical formulas in these, so display value, we could do like 2 plus 4 and send it like that as well. So basically, with this function, it's expecting to get an integer, right? If we send it something that's not an integer, so let's say we send it a double, like let's say we do display value and we send it 4.7, what it's going to do is it's automatically going to either promote or demote the match whatever it's expecting. So in this case, it's expecting an integer, so if we send it a double, it's going to basically convert this double to an integer, so it's actually going to get a 4 and not a 4.7. So remember, when a double is converted to an integer, it doesn't round it, it just drops the decimal part. Whatever value we send the function, a copy of it is being stored to this function parameter. So we can also pass more than one argument. So let's say that we want to do let's say that we have this function, so void show sum. So let's say that this function, all this function is going to do is receive some integers, it's going to add them together and display them. So let's say that we want to send it 3 integers, so int, let's just do int num1, int num2, and int num3. And then let's just do cout, and then display num1 plus num2 plus num3, and we can do an end line here as well. So basically, we can send as many parameters or as many variables to the function as we want. We just have to declare all of them. And so and I want to point something out, because if we've already seen that if we declare variables, say inside our function, we can do something like int x, y, z. So we can't do that here in the function. So we can't do something like int num1, num2, num3. So this will result in a compilation error, so don't do it like that. You have to do it how I have it written here, where I have integer on each of them, or if it's a double, you would put a double. So just whatever it is, you need to, yeah. So you can't do it like this. For this particular function, so remember last time we talked about function prototypes, and the prototype is if you want to put your functions after the main function. And we'll see when we get to our craps game and do some more work on that some more. Putting all of your functions after the main function can clean your code up and make it look really good. So if you do that, you need to have a function prototype, basically. And I like to think of the function prototype as sort of a function declaration. Like, you have to tell the compiler that this function is coming up, and it's not, like, we don't have the function description yet, but it's coming, so you have to give it some information. So the function prototype for this particular function, like let's just look at this one, would be just void show sum. And then this is where it gets a little bit interesting. We can either do this, like we could do int num1, int num2, or int num3. Remember, there's a semicolon. Or we could do void show sum, and then just do int. I don't know if there's a preference for which one is better. I see this done more commonly, probably just because that's easier to type and it's a little more concise. But you can use either of these for your function prototype. So what I usually do if I'm using function prototypes is after all of my functions are written, I just copy and paste the function headers to like above the main function, and then you just put semicolons after the function header, and that's basically your function prototype. And then to call this function, so this function is expecting 3 integers, so we can call this function with the following, actually, just call this, so this is the function call. So we would just do show sum, and then send it 3 integers. So it could be 5, 10, 15, 3 variables, 3, whatever we want to put in there as long as it's 3 integers. Or if we put doubles in, it's gonna, it will demote the double to an integer. All right, so now let's, so this gets back to the earlier question. Let's talk about how these values are actually passed to the function. So there's 2 ways that they're passed. Well, actually there's 3 ways, but we're not going to get to the 3rd way for a while. But there's basically passed by value and passed by reference. So today I want to talk about passed by value. And what passed by value means is basically just a copy of the argument is passed. So this is just a copy of the argument is passed. And so what this means is if we pass a value to, like, let me go back up here. Let's look at this code where we have the, so we have the void display value, and then we have our function description, and then we have our main function. And let's say that we just called this function, so our function call is just this display value x. Pretend that this is all erased. Anyway, so if we go to, okay, so we have our display value x. So what's going to happen is a copy of x, which is equal to 2, is going to be, so that 2 is going to be copied into the function parameter. So now the function parameter num is equal to 2. So basically the function is just getting a copy of this variable x. And so if this function makes a change to x, like let's say that we do in here, like let's say we do x equal 3, this isn't going to change. Well, actually this would have to be num is equal to 3, because the name in here is num. So let's say we do num equal 3. This isn't going to change the value of x in the main function because it doesn't have access to, so this this function doesn't have access to the variable x, it just has access to a copy of x. So basically this num, the num and the x have different memory locations, like it just gets a copy of that variable. And it might make more sense if I change this to x, because these can technically be the same name. And you'll see this a lot where they are the same name. x2 in the main function. Call this function and we give it x, it's going to copy a value, the value of x, to this function parameter. And so the variable, or this function parameter, so this variable in the function is a different variable than the variable in the main function. So if we change the value of x in this function, it's not going to change the value of x in the main function.